The Christmas Mystery, Chapter 5. December 5th. Joachim was glad there were no chocolates or plastic figures in the old Advent calendar, but Papa had not been right when he said there were only pictures behind the doors. A strange story was hidden inside the magic calendar. It took 24 days to read the whole of the tale, since the story was divided into 24 small chapters, one for each day. Each day, another pilgrim joined the pilgrimage. December 5th, was a Saturday. Mama and Papa usually slept late on the weekends. Joachim woke up at 7, as he always did. He sat up in bed and examined the picture. Only now did he see that one of the shepherds was holding a crook in his hand, just like Joshua. Why hadn't he noticed that before? Every time he looked at the magic calendar, he discovered something new. But surely there couldn't be anything more to see than what had been there all the time. Wouldn't that be like a trick? Amazed, Joachim took a deep breath. Perhaps that was what made the old Advent calendar magical. The picture outside had never been completely finished, and gradually what was missing was painted in as the doors were opened and the pieces of paper were read. Was it really possible to make a picture like that? Joachim knew that bread was not quite ready until it had risen all by itself, just in the baking pan and then in the oven. He knew that it had something to do with yeast, because Joachim had often helped Mama or Papa bake bread. When he was smaller, he used to think that babies inside their mother's stomachs must be like yeast. Wasn't the whole world a magic picture which added to itself? For the world changed all the time. It was never completely finished. If God had made a whole world that could create itself in every tiny nook and cranny, then he could probably manage to make a picture that developed itself in front of the eyes of those looking at it. Joachim opened the door with the number 5 on it. Today's picture was of a rowboat. In it sat a shepherd, an angel, a little girl, and 3 sheep. Joachim knew who they were, but what interested him most was the thin sheet of paper. The 3rd sheep. Elizabeth, the lamb, the angel, and the sheep and the shepherd sped through Sweden along dirt roads and grassy cart tracks, between yellow fields and through dense forest, until they looked out over a little town down by the sea. The wind blew so strongly that the waves were breaking over the line of the pier. Far out to the sea there was a sailing ship with 3 tall masts. We are in Halland. The town is called Halmstad, and the waves are rolling in from Katag. The watch says that it's 1,789 years have passed since Jesus was born. Are we still in Sweden? Ephriel nodded, but not so very long ago this was part of Denmark. Joshua the shepherd said they should hurry. They crossed a landscape that became flatter and flatter, and the further south they went, it became flatter still. Between grazing land and enclosed pastures lay small villages, each with a little church and a few houses. They were rushing through dense woodland when Joshua the shepherd stopped and knelt under a birch tree. He had found a sheep caught in a trap. The trap was probably set for a hare or for a fox. He loosened a cord from the sheep's leg and added, "But now the sheep shall come with us to Bethlehem." "Because it is one of us," said Ephriel, and the sheep seemed to answer, "Baa!" Off they went, the lamb, the 2 sheep first, the shepherd behind them, Elizabeth and Ephriel last. They entered a town and stopped in front of an old church with 2 tall towers over the entrance. The angel told them that they were in Scania, that the town was called Lund, and that the big church was an ancient cathedral. He looked at his angel watch. The watch says 1745. That proud cathedral has stood here for many, many centuries. Churches and cathedrals have been built all over the world, and it all started with the Christ child who was born in Bethlehem. It's as if a tiny kernel of wheat is put into the ground and grows into a whole field full. The glory of heaven is very easily scattered about. Elizabeth wondered about what the angel had said. "Can we go in?" The angel nodded. First the sheep, then the shepherd, then Elizabeth followed the angel inside. Inside, Elizabeth heard the most beautiful sound, and from the great organ there swelled such rich and powerful melodies. that tears came to her eyes, and when the angel saw her, he said, "Yes, weep, my child. That wonderful music was composed by Johann Sebastian Bach. He lived in Germany at this time, but his music will be heard throughout the world one day. That's not at all surprising, because his music is a tiny shred of the glory of heaven." The only things that disturbed the music were the two bleating sheep and the lamb scurrying about with its bell that tinkled. A man in black robes came towards them from the chancel. It was the priest. "Get out, all of you! Lund Cathedral is not a common sheepfold." Then the angel Ephriel stood and stepped in front of the priest. He spread out his wings, and he said the pastor should not be dismayed. He should remember that Jesus was born in a stable, and that he was called the Good Shepherd. The priest stood abruptly, for even though he was a priest in an ancient cathedral, he was not really used to angels. He fell to his knees. "Glory to God in the highest," he exclaimed. They left him like that. The angel made a sign to the others that they should go. Moments like that should never last too long. Perhaps he'll write a report to the bishop, then the whole thing will be hushed up, or rumors will start to circulate about the miracle at Lund. In any case, the bishop should remind the pastor that the word pastor means shepherd, nothing more and nothing less. Joshua struck his crook against the church wall and said, "To Bethlehem, to Bethlehem." They sped through a large park teeming with birds. A couple of soldiers came riding in their direction. When they saw the lively procession, they called, "Halt!" The men galloped toward them, but just as they bent down with from their horses to seize Joshua, the shepherd, they vanished like dew into the sunshine. Elizabeth gaped, for the pilgrims were standing on the same spot as they had been when the soldiers rode by. "They've disappeared." "Well, yes, in a way they have. But we were the ones who disappeared. Perhaps they were so terrified when they saw what happened that they fell off their horses." Elizabeth was astonished, so Ephriel had to explain. "We're traveling in two directions at once. One journey goes south on the map to the town of Bethlehem in Judea. The other passes through history to David's city, at a time when Jesus was born. It's very unusual way of traveling. Many people would say it was quite impossible, but nothing is impossible with God. For 1,000 ages in thy sight are like an evening gone, but the road to Bethlehem is exactly the same." The angel's words astonished Elizabeth, and she hid them in her heart. It makes it simpler to avoid danger if we can't give the slip to severe priests or angry soldiers by taking a step to one side. We have to take a step back in time instead. As little as 15 minutes or half an hour can certainly be sufficient. With those words, they were on their way once more. They passed large fields and small villages. Soon they could glimpse the sea in the distance, and in a short while they were standing on a deserted beach. "This is Øresund, the Sound. My watch shows that 1,703 years have passed since Jesus was born. We must get across to Denmark before the 18th century is over." "Here's a rowboat," said Joshua. They climbed aboard, the sheep first, Elizabeth Ephriel behind. Joshua pushed the boat out and jumped in at the last minute. The angel Ephriel rowed so hard that the spray foamed about the prow. The waves rocked the boats, and the lamb's bell rang piercingly all the way across. Joshua sat in the stern, and suddenly he said, "I can see Denmark." I can see Denmark. Joachim could almost see a little of Denmark too, but it was only inside his head. It was strange that Elizabeth was able to travel back in time, and it was strange to think that 2,000 years had passed since Jesus was born. But the stories about Jesus had traveled through all those years, so that Joachim had heard about him too. Elizabeth was traveling through time in another direction. When Mom and Papa got up, they came to see the picture in the Advent calendar. Joachim pointed to the boat with Elizabeth, Ephriel, Joshua, and the 3 sheep, but he said nothing about what had happened in the big park. He didn't tell them about the pilgrims and visiting the cathedral in Lund either. They would only have asked how he knew what the cathedral was, and Joachim had decided not to talk about the pieces of paper. After breakfast, they went into town to buy Christmas presents at the big department store, and in the toy department on the first floor, Joachim started to think about Elizabeth from the magic Advent calendar. Could it have been from this store that she began running after the little lamb? There was an old escalator, but wasn't it a very long time since Elizabeth had chased the lamb? This shop must be 40 years old, said his mother. I should think it's even older than that, said his father. So he knew. Elizabeth and the little lamb had run from this shop, and he understood completely because Joachim didn't like shopping in large stores either. He got really angry at the nagging sound of cash registers. That Saturday was extra long because he was thinking about what would happen when Elizabeth and the Angel of Furiel got to Denmark. It was even worse at bedtime. He had to lie right under the calendar, which was still full to bursting with secrets. To sleep so close to all those secrets was almost like living in a chocolate shop without being allowed to taste one single tiny chocolate. That's the end of chapter 5. Good night.